One of the owners, along with my wife, Sloan Beard back there. So our previous clinic, we talked about everything below the knee, which really focused on foot and ankle mechanics. Because you could literally talk about running for 2 weeks if you wanted to go into every nook and cranny of it. So I tried to break it down, even though I originally thought of this as one clinic. So this one is going to cover basically hip, core, and breathing, which is something that I feel like I really specialize in. So I'm going to really nerd out tonight and just impress you with all my nerd knowledge. But hopefully you get to take something away from it and apply it to your running directly. Something I didn't mention in the last clinic is why I kind of got into this field. When I was 10 years old, I was playing pickup football. My best friend tackled me from behind, broke my femur. It's a pretty bad break, spiral fracture. Went into the hospital. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks before they decided what they wanted to do. It was either going to be a full cast on this side, halfway down this side, you're a 10-year-old kid, or put a titanium rod in my femur. Went for the titanium rod because they said it was the shortest amount of recovery time. My rehab after that consisted of walking up and down the 3 stairs with the rails and then back down the 3 stairs. Once I did that, I got to go home. That was my rehab. Well, I was, like a kid, involved in every sport. Did pretty good at every sport, as good as you can do as a 10-year-old. Coming out of that, I was out of any physical activity for a year. I was on crutches for 8 months. Lo and behold, as I got further into sports, they would take film of me, like running during football or track. I had a limp all the way through high school. So I had to kind of become, I didn't know at the time, my own rehab specialist, and I kind of had to work on all those issues because anybody that's familiar with kind of the high school training atmosphere, you're not getting the best coaching. So if you need to fix something, you're probably going to have to do it on your own or find somebody to help you. I was lucky that I found a chiropractor that was involved in sports. So that's why I took this route. And that's also why I'm so passionate about getting people the best rehab and knowledge base that they can have. So something like me doesn't happen to another kid or another athlete. Because I didn't even know how it was going to affect me until, now I look back and I'm like, man, I wish I would have had proper rehab. It would have made all the difference in the world. So not necessarily rehab talk, but that's why I do this. And hopefully you kind of pick up on some of that passion and take something away from tonight. So let's get right into it. The next clinic is going to be on training protocols, warm-up, cool-down, nutrition, recovery. So it's kind of everything the last one. But this will just talk about some common kind of training ideals, philosophies, protocols, big on nutrition, hydration, and then recovery techniques. Recovery is becoming the new kind of, sexy way that all the practitioners in my field are heading because we're seeing so much bang for our buck in recovery techniques. So you can put an athlete through hell, but if they don't recover properly, they're not going to be able to go out there and work out the next day. So we're going to go over a lot of kind of the common protocols, misconceptions, myths, and kind of give you guys the best knowledge base. Again, like I said in the previous clinic, this is all about developing a filter. It's not about taking what I say and saying, man, this is really good stuff. It's about taking what I say, building your knowledge base, and then everything else that you read or look at, being able to apply the same filter and take what you need and leave what you don't. Make sure you register if you want to hit up that one as well. So we started off last time. This will be kind of repeat for the people who were at the first clinic, but we got to catch everybody else up. So I kind of started off last time by, is there a right way to run? And it's just kind of fun little, questioning because everybody bristles up immediately. I don't know if there is a right way to run. There's a lot of common themes that need to cross over for any type of runner. And if you see our kind of Olympic athlete profile here, there's no way that every one of these people is going to run the same. But there's going to be a lot of common themes that cross over to get them to run the best that they can. But if we try to fit every one of these people into the same pigeonhole, we're going to run into problems. And just like in golf, I think the best golf minds right now at this time say there's a million different swings for a million different people. And that's the same thing with running. Common ideals, but you have to know the intricacies so you can be the best coach, practitioner, best runner that you can be. So you got to really have a good knowledge base. Obviously, there's a lot of debate about running, which is kind of funny because it's one of the most innate human movements that we have. It's a very old human movement, but there's always new research coming out. There's all these different techniques. People make money off books, DVDs, writing articles in magazines, whatever it might be. But it's always debated, so it's fun to just put more knowledge out there. And you see a lot of recycling of knowledge, but also a lot of false propaganda too. So it's hard to go look at a magazine or an internet article or whatever it is and say, is this true or not? So you really have to find good people in the field, and it's not just people like me, it's wherever you're at to help you along that path. So when we're talking about performance running, you have to talk about running economy. And that's really what it boils down to, running economy. Again, we covered this in the first clinic. 3 portions to it: metabolic, neural, which would be kind of everything including emotional, neurologic control. And then we're focusing on biomechanics, the mechanics of running, because that's what we deal with a lot in the clinic. So that's what the focus of tonight is on. And if you're going to work on performance running from a biomechanical standpoint, you have to be looking at these 3 things. We covered ankle dorsiflexion in the first one, but if you're not hitting some form of coaching or hands-on care or rehab, prehab for hip extension and breathing, and you'll see not respiration, we'll hit on that later. If you're not working on these 3 things, you're missing something. A lot of other things to work on too, but these are huge from a mechanical standpoint. Okay, covered this in the first one. We'll go back over it briefly. Greg Cook is a really popular physical therapist that came up with the alternating mobility stability model for joints in the human body. All it says, if you start at the foot, you've got a stable joint, the ankle's mobile, knees stable, move on up. What we're looking at tonight is kind of the core hip glute complex. And if you can see there, the low back is a stable joint, the hip is a mobile joint. We'll talk about this a little more, but in today's society where we all sit around like this, or in Zach's case like this, we start to shut down that kind of pattern. And our low back becomes more mobile because we shut down our hip mobility. So we trade that relationship, which causes a lot of issues. So we'll be talking about that more tonight, but you'll see why this is so important. And I also highlight this because sometimes if you're trying to mobilize a stable joint, you can cause a problem, and then vice versa. So it's good to just have, again, a little bit of knowledge on these things. Okay, why do I have a picture of a jet engine? Another really popular doctor in our field, we were at a clinic, and he kind of pointed out that sitting around a table with some of his engineering friends, talking about aircraft manufacturing, and they said that over 90% of the engineering effort of an airplane is focused on the connection of the engine to the wing. So the engine is our powerhouse, the rest of the fuselage and the wing is our body. If that thing's not going to hold onto the wing, we're not going to go anywhere, right? So that is huge. Now how does that correlate to running? Well, that connection becomes our kind of punctum fixum, or our fixed point, right? So if you look at this cheetah, you see how silent kind of the core is with just the extremities moving around it. So if we don't have a stable, sound core with good connections, with our connections to the engine, our shoulders and hips, which are kind of the outlets to the extremities, and we'll define core here in a second, but core, really broad strokes term, everything but extremities. It gets this kind of six-pack, moniker, but that's kind of it's a misnomer, really. I guess I'm a big aviation nerd too. I went to a lot of air shows as a kid. Kyle will appreciate this, I think. But you got your B-52 bomber here. Not the most agile bomber in the world or plane in the world. If you've ever seen one land, they kind of rock and tilt as they come in. It cannot turn on a dime. It can't barrel roll. It can't bank very steep. And you see the engines are out off the main body or off the fuselage. Now, if we move to the Typhoon, which is a Russian fighter jet, it's not U.S., probably the best fighter jet ever made. Sorry, it's not American. It's doing some speed training with its little parachute right here. But you can see the engine is in the core. Every fighter jet has the engine in the core, which makes it very versatile, very nimble. It can bank, it can turn, it can pull a cobra, it can do whatever it wants. So it's a very good analogy for how our core reacts with our extremities, right? If we have kind of this uncontrolled scenario where the core doesn't talk correctly to the extremities, I picture it as like a B-52 or like a baby giraffe. Very clumsy, not a lot of agility, stability going on there. So the core, this is what we typically think of as the core, right? Every 6-pack abs, 8-pack abs in this case. The core is not just your abs, and it's not really just the muscles around your abdomen. And I put a picture of a unicorn up because it's fun, but also the core is literally like this unicorn. It's this mythical beast. I'm going to do core training. Well, that's fantastic. You're going to do core training. What are you actually training? Well, I'm training my abs. Well, do you know what your abs are supposed to do? Well, they're supposed to flex me. Are they? Well, we'll answer all those questions, but you also want to know what your goal is. Just like running. What's your goal of a certain, workout? What are you trying to do with that workout? Same thing applies when you're training the core. Are you trying to fight extension? Are you trying to induce flexion? What are you trying to do? If you don't know, it makes it really hard to train it. If you're going to talk about the core, you have to take a little bit of a sidestep here and talk about fascia and fascial slings. If anybody doesn't know, fascia is the connective tissue that the more we find out about it, the more we research it, is interwoven into every tissue of the body, bone, muscle, ligament, tendon. And the more they find out, that we realize that fascia is actually kind of the communication between all those tissues. It's overloaded with stretch receptors. It has a huge neural drive. It's what holds all the fluid within our muscles. We used to have this thought of separate muscles. Now we're seeing one big muscles with fascia interwoven in between them that kind of separates them. So it's kind of an old school thought to think of bicep and tricep and quadricep. It's more these fascial slings and kind of chains of muscles and how they act together. Now when we're talking core specifically, we're thinking, like I said, everything but arms and legs. So we see some of the big slings right here. So we see how like the external obliques are talking to the adductors and how the lats talk to the glutes. So you need to know some of these relationships, because a lot of the times when we have a problem in a shoulder or a hip, it's not actually a problem with that, right? It's a mechanical issue elsewhere that's causing it. And if we don't understand some of these issues, we might again just be beating our heads against the wall trying to foam roll a messed up hip flexor or going after some T-spine issue. But lo and behold, it's the other side of the body, or something in these fascial slings that's a little bit off. So the first thing we got to explain if we're going to talk about core is what the core actually is. So there's actually two cores. So the external core is the muscles that surround your abdomen, which is made up of a lot of muscles. So it's going to be rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, obliques, internal and external, your lumbar erectors, a little bit of your QL. So all these muscles that kind of make up your body armor. And then if we go down into the pelvic floor, we've got some musculature as well. A lot of little muscles down there. Even hip flexors, glutes, up into the upper back muscles, serratus, a lot going on. So it's not just abs, right? Internal core would be comprised of this kind of cavity right here, in between this ring of muscle, which is your thoracic diaphragm, and then this pelvic bowl, which is also lined with muscles, which is your pelvic floor. So this is your internal core. So there's actually two cores. Now these arrows indicate pressure, right? So as we breathe in, we're a negative pressure breather, so we have to draw air in out of the environment. So as we breathe in, the diaphragm depresses, and it pushes air against the pelvic floor. And Boyle's law says volume decreases, pressure increases, so we create this little kind of pocket or balloon of air. Now, in our day, we all tend to be what we call secondary respirators. We all tend to breathe up here. We're very chest dominant, and that's again because we spend a lot of the time here, which shuts down the thoracic diaphragm. I'll go into a little more detail here pretty soon, but you really have to understand what proper breathing is, and I'll go back here for a second. Breathing is different than respiration. Respiration is the transfer of oxygen between hemoglobin and red blood cells. Breathing is the action of respirating. Does that make sense? Respiration is the trading of cellular oxygen and carbon dioxide. Breathing is the muscular action and the mechanical action. So can we actually work on respiration? Not from a mechanical standpoint. Can we actually improve respiration through working on breathing? Yeah. So it might sound kind of confusing, but we'll talk about oxygen saturation here pretty soon. So babies. Got this little baby here. Anybody that's been in our clinic knows all about the kind of the dead bug and the diaphragm breathing. But babies have this big old Buddha belly, not because they've been drinking too much milk or anything. It's because they don't have a lot of muscular development yet. So they rely on that cushion of air to stabilize their spine. And the first couple months, the only movements that they start to learn are rolling over. Once they get onto their stomach, they're going to start going into extension. And all that stabilization comes from proper breathing. And you watch little toddlers run around, they got this big old stomach they're letting hang out. And then we start getting into society, and all of a sudden we got to suck in to wear a bikini around the pool. I don't wear a bikini, but other people wear a bikini around the pool. And we really mess things up. So babies, we talk about regression for progression. We're always taking people back to the beginning to teach the basics of movement and breathing so then we can progress them through rehab and training. Because if you can't do this, you can't do much. Improper breathing. Now, you can see that we had to wipe this guy's face out because he was so embarrassed about how he was breathing. But this rib flare, and everybody might say, well, that's my military posture. That's what I'm supposed to do. Well, no, this is a rib flare. Because if we have improper breathing, what tends to happen is we get this rib flare because the diaphragm is not depressing, so we have to overinflate our lungs using secondary respiration. So that means using all the muscles in between your ribs, your neck, your shoulders. So all the people that complain of this tension in their traps and their neck and their shoulders, and at the end of the day they would just want to go home and drink some scotch and take a leave, whatever. A lot of the times because secondary respiration is wreaking havoc on the upper torso. Now the other thing that's going to happen here is we get this kind of scissoring action. So the ribs point this way, and then lo and behold we see the hips start to go this way, and we'll talk about this more. But now what we've created is kind of this scissoring effect between the hips and the ribs, instead of this nice canister of air for our spine to ride on. And again, we're going to keep going down this rabbit hole, but proper breathing, diaphragm expanding 360 degrees, creating this balloon of air. Improper breathing, secondary respiration up here, using everything that you should be using later in a run when you're taxed and you're trying to draw in as much oxygen as you need. Secondary respiration is needed, it's just not needed at resting everyday task, right? Okay, so first benefit of proper breathing. Like I said, we'll go into O2 saturation a little bit. I started carrying around, I didn't have it in Hawaii, but I started carrying around a pulse oximeter. You can get them really cheap, like 25 bucks off Amazon. If you're a runner and you're into training, it's actually something that's pretty beneficial because you can see if you have any kind of breathing issues or a capacity issue. But through proper breathing, we can oxygenate the blood a little bit better. And the reason being, if we're a secondary respirator, we literally shut off the apex of our lungs. So up to 1/8 or 1/8 to 1/10 of the lung gets shut off because through muscular contraction up here, we're not allowing the lungs to inflate fully. So if I get another, 1/10 or 2/10 of lung inflation, all of a sudden my O2 saturation is going to go through the roof, or at least be the best that it can. And if I'm going to go run a marathon, you're going to bet that I want the best oxygen saturation I can get. I don't want to be at a deficit on anything to do with the biochemistry or physiological nature of running, right? So if we can, mainline or best anything through mechanical training, this is one way to do it. A lot of the things go into O2 saturation. You could have an issue where you actually have, the athlete heart where you're moving blood too fast and your oxygen saturation goes down. That's another issue. But getting a little pulse oximeter, you can check this. Good thing to check in the morning too. A lot of people base workouts based on heart rate, O2 saturation. You might change it based on how you're feeling in the morning. So it's a very easy way, besides getting, a full, automatic blood pressure cuff, or if you want to go get your own EKG machine, go for it. I don't know why you do that, but that's a huge benefit that kind of gets overlooked. This guy is not getting ready to throw up. He might be, but he's got what everybody's probably had at one point, a side stitch. And this is a pretty big deal as far as thoracic diaphragm breathing goes. It used to be that nobody really knew what side stitch was. Is it a cramp in the obliques? Is it a cramp in the abs? Some people did think it was a cramp in the thoracic diaphragm, which lo and behold it is. What it is kind of an all hands on deck. So when we take off in a run, especially a high intensity run, and we're a secondary respirator, our thoracic diaphragm is basically laying dormant. Well, as our body gets taxed at both a mechanical level and an oxygen level, it's going to ask the body to do whatever it can do to get the oxygen it needs. So all of a sudden it asks the thoracic diaphragm to turn on. When it does that, it goes into spasm just like any cold muscle would if it's not warmed up properly. Why are almost 85 to 90% of side stitches occur on the right side? Well, our liver is over there. There's a lot more connections to the thoracic diaphragm. And if we're in this scissored position, the thoracic diaphragm is already on tension because it's being stretched. So now it's being stretched over more connections, and when it spasms, it tends to cramp on the side with all those attachments. Does that make sense? It's not always the case. You can definitely get it on the left because it spans the entire rib cage. But that's where the research is kind of found. And you'll see later on breathing tips, there's ways to combat that. There could be other issues if you have chronic side stitch, where it could be a dehydration issue, a mechanical issue up and down the chain. But this is one of the biggest things you're seeing come out in research as far as like surface and deep EMG studies. The big one we're going to talk about as far as advantage of using proper diaphragmatic breathing is building what we call intra-abdominal pressure. So that balloon of air is huge. When we can create pressure within the abdominal cavity correctly, we really create this air shock. So I equate it to like a Jeep or a semi. if you have an off-road vehicle that's running on rocks and we don't want the chassis to get damaged or bent or broken, we have to make sure that we can move independently with the extremities and allow that chassis to remain silent. Well, when we pressurize the abdominal cavity, our lumbar spine literally gets to ride on this big pocket of air. So we'll talk in a second how we kind of reverse that role and the detriment that can cause. Does this make sense to everybody? That, I mean, you're literally riding on a cushion of air when you pressurize this. Now when you don't, we get some problems, and I'm going to put this big power lifter up here because, first of all, most runners think they shouldn't be lifting weights. That's not why I put this up here, but you should be cross-training. That's my PSA for the night. But you can see this guy wearing a weight belt. So we literally have a God-given weight belt, and that is our internal core. A weight belt, believe it or not, is not there to hold your intestines in from shooting out when you deadlift 800 pounds. It's there to give you a little bit of proprioception or tactile sense for your abdomen to push against it so that you build more pressure. That's why they're wearing those weight belts. Now, if they're going to wear it for spinal stability with an 800-pound load, what would you want to do if you're going to go run an ultra where we know that you're going to increase body weight with each step about 2.5-fold, and then you're going to put in, I don't know how many steps, 250,000 steps? So how much weight do you think you totaled for that entire race over a 24-hour period? Way more than he's lifting. So I want to maximize any intrinsic stability that I have. Now, how do we mess it up? Well, Arnold, he set off this wonderful mess up, and so did Pilates and all these things. So this is called an abdominal hollow, or drawing the belly button towards the spine, which you're going to see if you go by the pool in Vegas, all these, little suck-ins right here. So what happens is we actually ask these prime movers, our abs, our obliques, our lumbar erectors, to become postural muscles. Postural muscles and prime movers, like prime movers are our big muscles, quads, biceps, all those guys that are meant to move and turn off. When we switch that role and we ask prime movers to become postural stabilizers, and they get fatigued throughout an entire day, I equate it to if I gave you something even as light as this, and I said, I want you to hold it at 90 degrees in your hand for 12 hours. At the end of the day, I get to come up and I get to resist you, and you can't drop it. Your chances of winning are, drastically decreased. Same thing, you're playing that same game with your spine. So all day I'm going to suck in, I'm going to ask my abs, my low back, and everything to hold me up. I'm not going to breathe correctly, so I'm going to breathe up here. All of a sudden, let's say I'm running, I hit a root. Boom, there goes my back. There goes my knee. It's not just the back. Everything kind of feeds in and out of the core as far as stability goes. Or just say you're walking and you step in a pothole or off a curb awkwardly. There goes your back. So learning how to stabilize intrinsically through proper breathing shuts down this whole system. Also, for muscle economy, if we're not asking prime movers to be postural stabilizers, and I'm going to go run a long distance race, I'm not taxing the body near as much. And you're going to see mechanically, if we can really get sound through the core and through the hip complex, we kind of quiet the system down, and if we go back to economy, then it's going to feed both into mechanical economy and kind of metabolic economy at that point, because we're not asking the muscles to do as much work. I put this up here because we can see that if we go back to the picture of the baby, this is kind of where we take people. Like I said, when we go through rehab, that's kind of that 3-month position. Now this is your typical neurodevelopmental chart of, all the way from newborn to 15 months. If somebody can't lay on their back and properly breathe through their diaphragm with their legs in the air, there's no way that they should be up running. I mean, they still can. I'm not going to take somebody out of running, but their chance of injury is through the roof. I mean, that's just statistically, proven time and time again. So this is literally what we follow in rehab. So we get people down on the ground, they're rolling around, they're breathing, then they get up to half kneeling, then they're standing. I mean, we're never going to give somebody a weighted exercise or a dynamic load until they can do all this and do all this while breathing. So if you ever realized, say you're moving furniture or something, you go to pick up a couch, you're not breathing the whole time, that's your body waving a red flag saying, you're in trouble, you're in danger, I'm going to shut down one of the most primal things, breathing, so you stop doing that task. It's literally shutting you down. So if you ever notice that you're in a stretch or whatever activity and you're holding your breath, especially if you're trying to stretch or do mobility work, see if you can get in that position and actually breathe and calm yourself down. Your body actually neurologically accepts that a little bit more. So just a little tip when you're working on mobility stuff. So you can see our model right here. I think she's wearing the same outfit. Yeah. But this is our dead bug progression. And we're going to give you at the end a very kind of detailed plan of how we go through these things, but this baby is literally not using any muscle to maintain that position. That's a resting postural position for an infant. It is not a resting postural position for an adult. We have different ratios of extremities to core. We got more body weight to deal with. We got more bone density. But we do try to recreate it to kind of take ourselves back to those infantile regressions so we can reset the clock a bit. We literally have to go in there and hit the reset button. And you can see Dr. Sloan kind of monitoring breathing here. She's looking for that 360 degrees of expansion. Like I said, we're going to go over this stuff. I just want to show you, if you can do this and incorporate this into your, watching TV, sitting in the car, sitting at the desk, and learn how to breathe. We're trying to combat, whatever your age is, 10, 20, 30, 40 years of improper breathing. So you have to do this stuff a lot. So we try to give you as many tools as possible to incorporate breathing, because when it comes to a high dynamic load activity like running, it's really hard to go from not breathing properly to breathing perfect in a high demand activity like that. So I have to make fun of the Minneapolis running group because this is just kind of really funny to me. We're going to move into talking about hip extension and the glute hip complex, but this lady's not even in hip extension. So I just thought it was really funny. I'm a nerd, I told you, but she's in neutral position, and it just, they had their message right, but not the picture. So I hope nobody's been a part of that group. I know everybody's seen this at some point. Something somewhere went terribly wrong, but this is kind of our, rise and fall as it is right now. When we talk about pelvic kind of position and glute activation and building power from the hips, sitting in a flex position, yeah, it's detrimental to breathing, but it wreaks havoc on glute hip complex. I mean, gluteal amnesia is a real thing. It might sound made up, but gluteal amnesia literally means you forget how to use your glutes. And if you've been a patient in here, you're probably working on that to some extent. You can have really high-level athletes that have no clue how to activate their glutes when they're asked to. So if they can't even turn on their glute laying supine, we'll test this here pretty soon. If they can't do this laying supine, what's the chance of them doing it, even if they're a sprinter, an NBA athlete, a golfer, a runner, whatever it is? It's not going to happen. When that doesn't happen, it causes problems. So by sitting all day, if anybody's ever heard of Vladimir Yanda, he came up with upper cross and lower cross syndrome. So when we sit all day, we literally put a long stretch on our glutes, we tighten our hip flexors, we affect our low back, we affect our abs. So literally, we end up like this. We end up like J-Lo with a beer gut, right? So we stretch out these guys, we stretch out these guys. Well, when we put muscles on long stretch, they get weak. When we put muscles on a shortened load over time, they shorten to accommodate that load. Well, then we're going to go ask somebody to run, and we want them to run with this nice tall posture, a good solid canister, and they're stuck like this. Well, it's not going to happen. So we have to get them out of this position first. And here you can see this anterior posterior tilt. I call this anterior tilt J-Lo. This is grandpa posture. So anterior tilt, posterior tilt. We want to live somewhere in between, ideally, for any athletic activity, everyday life, and that's what we equate to the bucket of water. So if my pelvis is a bucket of water, and that water is kinetic or potential energy that I want to turn into kinetic energy when I want to run, if I'm already in kind of an offloaded position, my chances for building optimum power, again, I'm in a big deficit. So you're going to see, even in that dead bug position, you're in a neutral pelvis position. So a lot of bang for your buck in that. Working on breathing, working on neutral low back, neutral pelvis. There's a lot to that, especially if you have a desk job, or you're just prone to kind of sticky hips, you don't have a lot of hip mobility. That's where you want to start. We talked about this in the last clinic. Another reason why neutral pelvis is so important is because of stretch shortening cycle. And we'll go way off the deep end of hip extension. Believe it or not, all we're talking about is hip extension from here on out. Stretch shortening cycle. So we talked about the windlass mechanism. Remember, in the foot, winding up the plantar fascia by going through big toe dorsiflexion, ankle dorsiflexion, and then we get to spring off. When we wind up soft tissue, we don't have to use muscle as much. So again, our economy goes way up, and we don't tax the body as much as far as an injury standpoint. Well, when we move up to the hip, that same mechanism needs to occur. So if we don't go through extension, let's start with no extension first of all. Let's go back to our Minneapolis running group lady. So no hip extension. So when she goes to leave this kind of toe off position, she hasn't wound up anything in the front of her leg here, right? It's at neutral. It's at resting position. It's literally like she just did this. So that's not hip extension. That's just neutral. Okay? If she's done that, she hasn't wound anything up, so now it's literally like dragging her leg out of mud. She has to turn her hip flexors on, load her quads. Now you're going to ask yourself to do that for 10 or 20 or 200,000 steps. Those are the people that come in and my hip flexors are just so darn tight, I'm almost crippled after a race. Well, your problem's not your hip flexors. Your problem is you don't get into hip extension to load the soft tissue to act like a recoil or a spring to drive it back without a lot of effort. So hip extension affects a lot of things. And besides just coming into this kind of hip flexion moment, one of the biggest muscles in our body is our glute, and if we're not using it to propel us forward, we're doing a lot more work with our calves, hamstrings, whatever else it takes, and that's, you're going to see really tight calves, you're going to see blown out hamstrings, all those things feed forward, and it all starts with kind of getting in the proper position and using the soft tissue to your biggest benefit. That's Ryan Hall, I don't know if you can tell. He is in, right now, the last part of hip extension here, just about ready to go back through his leg cycle. So, we don't know where he's going to land because this is still picture, and we don't want to guess ever with a runner. But all I'm trying to show you here is a neutral low back with 10 degrees of hip extension. You don't need, even a sprinter doesn't need more than 10 degrees of hip extension. So what we see a lot of though is, take this for example, we'll talk about this in a second. When we see people do leg swings, and Alex know what I'm talking about, they get these huge lever arms going, and all of a sudden we see all this lumbar extension occurring. Well, now I'm telling my brain, hey, it's cool if you just want to use lumbar extension instead of the hip. Just go after it. So I'm going to go out there and run, especially maybe I ran a 5K and I'm in that last 200 meters or whatever, and I'm sprinting, and I'm just, I'm running out here, I'm all proud, my butt's sticking out. I'm not getting any hip extension, I'm also chewing up my lumbar spine. So again, this is our punctum fixum. The lumbar spine should be stable, the hip should be mobile, we should be moving through full hip extension. And we'll show you drills to be working on this. I show Ryan Hall because he's a distance runner, probably most people in here are a distance runner. See somebody like Michael Johnson, now he's coming back through the leg cycle. You have to show the leg cycle too because this is this passive wind-up that I'm talking about. So you see a lot of people, especially ultra runners, and there's a break-even point here, I'll admit. You see a lot of ultra runners that never get into this leg cycle position because they're at such a slow pace. It would not be, I agree, not be economical to go through a full leg cycle if you're on a 12-minute, 15-minute pace, right? You'd look really weird. You look like road runner, just, slow motion or whatever. But we have to go through hip extension even at a 15-minute pace. It might not be 10 degrees. First of all, to offload the lumbar spine, but also to maximize economy. It's literally like 3 to 4 times the workload to not go into hip extension, to use your calves, hamstrings, low back to propel you forward. The leg cycle position as well is kind of hotly debated. You'll see on the next slide. A lot of people, even on Ryan Hall here, I know because if you look at other pictures of him, he's going to fall into the exact same position here at the top before he comes back into his toe down or foot fall, not foot strike, we'll talk about that, into his foot strike position. When you fall short of that, again, you're not winding up these soft tissues. So that's why we work on things like leg cycles and standing leg cycles. And I'm not a big fan, you're going to see, of foot placement. If your hip mechanics are sound and your core mechanics are sound, and you know what's going on underneath of your ass, your foot's going to end up in the right place. Okay? And both these guys are pretty good, right? So, better pay attention, man. Okay, I thought this was really cool. If you look at everybody's low back, it's neutral. If you look at everybody's hip extension, it's the exact same. This guy's in a different little position here. He's at foot strike. It's all exactly the same. These are elite runners. Yeah, it's not a commercial for the Kenyan or Ugandan team, but they do pretty good. The other thing I wanted you to see on this though is, what are we looking at? Maybe it's on the next one. Oh, I think I got my 200. Yeah, okay. So we're talking about foot strike. So this gets called foot strike a lot. I think foot strike's wrong because that makes you think that you're placing your foot somewhere. We call foot placement, or forefoot striker, midfoot striker, rear foot striker. Well, I don't like to think of placing my foot somewhere. I think it's falling somewhere. Because like I said, if everything else is working properly, it just falls into place. No pun intended. But that's what you're looking at. And if I put this guy right here under 3D analysis, you would see that he is actually a little more forward tilted, which he's stuck in that anterior tilt. This isn't nearly as bad as you see if you go out to like if you go out to the St. Patrick's Day 5K this weekend or whatever, you're going to see a lot of people, especially when they get dogged, that run way out here. They're stuck in this little kind of hip flexion moment. They're going through these little, I call them Shaggy off Scooby-Doo, because they have to get a ton of kind of knee flexion, but it's not a real leg cycle because there's no hip extension involved. So it's just literally running with your leg with no hip extension at all. I mean, that's got to be taxing. There's no way you're going to be fast. So tying it all together, this is another PSA. Use the damn top hole on your shoes. It's for a heel lock. It's there for a reason. So if you're a trail runner, use it. Does everybody know what a heel lock is that's in here? No? So we got some high-level runners that don't even know what a heel lock is. I was pointing at you, yeah. So a heel lock, you take the top hole on your shoe, you reverse the direction that you normally go in and create a tiny little loop. And then you put the lace through there on either side, and you pull that sucker down. It does not come out. It literally pulls your heel back into the shoe. So this is also how you should fit your shoe when you go into the shoe store, to see if your heel is going to sit in the heel cup. So I'm using the tie it all together to kind of wrap up my talk, but this is my PSA. Use that top hole. It's there for a reason. Especially trail runners, because if you're bombing downhill, you have a tendency to blow out the front of your shoe. If you have a heel lock on there, you're going to be a lot happier and your shoes are going to last a lot longer. Okay, so let's talk about the fun stuff, how you actually take all the things we've been talking about and incorporate them. So we went over dead bugs. I'm going to have Sloan come up and demo some stuff. So I like to use the wall for dead bugs. You have to watch that cord a little bit. And I'll tell you why. So face feet that way. I want you to use the wall. So in a dead bug position, we call it triple flexion. So her ankles are flexed, her knees are flexed, her hips are flexed, all at 90 degrees. Low back is in contact with the floor, whatever you're working on. Also important, she has neutral chin. So if she's in extension, she's actually kind of cheating and searching for stability. So we want this to be shut down. So it feels like you're giving yourself a double chin.
So attractive.
Yeah. Now from here, a lot of people you're going to see these ribs way out. Can you flare your ribs? So they're going to be stuck like that.
And if I extend more of my neck, I can
yeah.
more.
So what we have her do is we want her to breathe down here. So show them a bad breath. So we want her to transfer all that breath down here. But what we also want her to start to do is act like when she's exhaling, she's blowing up a balloon and she's going to flatten these ribs. She's going to leave them there, take another breath. So now what are we doing? We're approximating the lower ribs to the top of the hip or the ASIS. So she's building that canister. Right? So this is what we're running around. This is our punctum fixum right here. So that's where you can see my next point, 20 to 30% of core co-contraction. I'll admit, I used to be a proponent because when we talk about this drill, we used to talk about just complete relaxation, right? Sorry if I'm tickling you. We didn't want people to be activating here because they're so used to this suck-in posture. So we'd say, just let it go. Just let everything fall. Well, that's fine if you're walking around, but when we start to do a high-level activity like running, we need a little bit of contraction. So how you figure out what 20 to 30% is, flex like somebody's going to hit you, then you back it off to about 20%. That's what you should be running with. You need a little bit of this kind of hip to rib feel, a little bit of contraction, but still able to breathe. That is huge. I mean, I can't tell you how huge that is. It gets the core talking to the extremities just a little bit better from a neurologic standpoint. First 2 miles of every run. This is what we're going to work on to try to get you to breathe properly and offset any kind of a thoracic diaphragm spasm, side stitch, whatever it might be. We're also going to relax the body. We're going to kick the sympathetics in favor of the parasympathetics because we're kind of working that area of the spine through diaphragmatic breathing. First 2 miles of your run, you're going to be trying to focus on breathing down here because that's not when you're taxed. You kind of have a choice how you're breathing at that point. You hit 5 miles at a decent clip, you're going to breathe however you need to just get through the run. And then when dogged, try to take 10 good breaths. Now if you don't know how to breathe properly to begin with, that's a problem, but if you do, and you say you feel the wheels coming off, like say you have an IT band issue, and all of a sudden you're starting to get a little twinge, or whatever it might be. I want you to pause, get back into this co-contraction, take a couple good breaths, and see if it knocks you out of it. I mean, this stuff is that powerful. It's not like this is voodoo. I mean, there's an article on the wall that proves that it's not voodoo. But this is stuff to where you can actually offset a lot of injuries by just getting the core to do its job, which then feeds stability out to the extremities. Yep.
Is that 10 good breaths after you stop running and then do it? And then
If you have to slow down, I didn't mention. If you have to slow your pace to be able to do that, right? If you're running 6-minute pace or something, you're probably not going to be able to just say, oh yeah, diaphragm breath, that was nice. Yeah, you might have to slow down and get that in, but that would be huge to offset the rest of, maybe you got a 10-mile run, you're only 5 miles in. It's well worth it to take that time. Okay, now let's talk about the actual core and what you're working with, or working on when you're working on core stuff. So who here does planks? Or has done a plank?
All day long.
Right, okay. So show them your all day long bad plank.
Elbows.
So I can't tell you how many people come in and say, I can do a plank for 10 minutes. I don't have core problems. Well, that's fine. Well, now I'm going to show you a bad plank so you can't sag more. Okay, so we call this riding on the spine. So what do we just say? When you get stuck in lumbar extension, we get stuck in this kind of position where if I'm in an anterior tilt, it's really hard for me to go into hip extension because I'm already kind of there. So if she rides on the spine, what's she doing? She's getting really good at being bad. Right? She's just feeding to her brain and everything else up and down the chain. You can relax for a sec. This is how you should do it. This is how you should stabilize. Shut down the low back, right on the joints of the low back, the facets, and just shorten these puppies up, stretch this puppy out, and then you can go run. A lot of people can probably make it through, but I would say if you want to be the best runner you can, we need to fix this. So what do? I call it kind of the plank pike. So when you're doing a plank, you should literally be tractioning arms down and tractioning feet up. So if she let herself go, her butt would shoot up into the air. It's that kind of feel. So everything's on. Glutes, quads, hamstrings. You can see you're shaking already. If you can do this for a minute, you're really strong instead of just sitting there and holding it and saying, look what I can do. All right? So that's your plank, is literally fighting extension. It's not just that we're supposed to stay straight. It's keeping you out of this. That's what your abs are made for. Your abs are not made to flex. They're made to keep you from overextending. A lot of people, we got that bad message because we all did, tons of crunches in high school. Well, I did, but we always thought, oh, we got to flex to get these abs. Well, seeing your rectus abdominis really comes down to a body fat percentage thing, but actually building a stable core comes to fighting extension and fighting rotation, as you're going to see in the next slide. Rollouts, if anybody's ever seen the rollout wheel, I think it's in here. We use physio balls too.
Yellow ball.
Yeah. So, anybody ever do kind of rollouts using the ab wheel or anything like that?
That one?
Yeah.
Thank you, Bridge.
Got a little prop manager. So, if you watch Sloan do this, do one improper. Don't fall off the edge of the table here. She's just so good she can't even do it improper. But
That feels really bad.
yeah. But again, if you're riding on the spine, that's what we see a lot of people do. They go into this thing, they just get real lazy, they're in this anterior tilt. The best way to correct this is turn your glutes on before you go and shoot your hips to the floor. So again, this should be that co-contraction feel of shooting your hips into the floor with your glutes on. There's no way, she's not even breaking neutral here. That's what you should be working on, fighting extension. It's not about the rollout, it's about not doing this. Okay, now dead bug variations. Do a dead bug with head up there. There are a million. I always tell people, because I tell people, don't do sit-ups. Sit-ups are repetitive lumbar flexion. It's one of the most detrimental things to your low back. Is flexion bad in a total sense? No. But when you do it 80, 100 times every day, yeah, it's probably not the best thing, especially when you sit all day and you're flexed all day. So everybody always says, well, what am I supposed to do for my core then? I always say I can give you 1,000 different core exercises, and I could probably give you 500 based off this position right here. So in a dead bug, you can do a lot of different things. She can load the wall, which is an axial load, which is going to be hard. She can go through heel taps. There are tons of videos on these on our website. I'm just kind of giving you guys some broad strokes. She can do windshield wipers, where she's kind of rolling back and forth. But literally, again, what's she doing? She's fighting extension. She's not letting her low back come up off the floor. She has a fixed anchor to the floor of the table, so she's getting a good sense of that kind of just neutral spine. Now, wall lean leg cycles. These are where we start incorporating the core into our running kind of movement patterns. I'm going to have Sloan help me out with this one again. So she'll grab this piece of wall. So when you do these, you're going to be arms out in front, fingers spread. She's going to back up about 5 inches. She's going to pull her shoulder blades back. Now she's going to step into the wall, so she's got about 2 inches. Now she's going to put hands out flat, and she's going to fall into the wall. Now we've just created our 5 degrees of optimal lean for a runner, right? And it's all through the ankle. It's like our ski jumper from the last one. It's all from the ankle. Now what you're going to see some people do is go into automatic lumbar extension. They're just going to sit in here on the spine and say, hey, yeah, look at me. So she's going to actually offset that by doing a posterior pelvic tilt or that kind of grandpa posture. Now once she does this, she's simply going to run through leg cycles. So she's going to, we'll do it on this side, drag her foot up her leg to where her foot is right above her knee and heel is right under her butt. And then she's going to go right back down. She's just going to run through those. So now what are we doing? We're feeding to the brain, proper foot position, proper canister control, and that's all we're going to do. Something I like to do, if you have your kind of super friend, you're going to have them go up to the top here. So go to the top of your leg cycle. So see, she is hip flexor dominant. What happened in your last race?
I thought
She
you were
couldn't walk
describing
afterwards.
me. Yeah.
So do you see how her heel, she's already wanting to get here?
Yeah.
She needs to be here, which is just leaving extension. Now I'm going to load, and she's going to fight me the whole way down. So now we're putting an eccentric load, which we're not going to explain too much on that, but the whole posterior chain here is kind of getting a message that I'm supposed to control this motion on the way down so that I'm not shoving my foot into the ground. That my foot gets to rest nicely and then take off as fast as it can. So now we'll start speeding these up, and what she's going to do is try to kick my hand right after she hits the ground. So she's going to, no, whoa.
Sorry.
So I'm going to push her down.
Went for it.
I'm going to push her down, and as soon as she hits, I lift up and she kicks. And I'm going to push down, kick. And that's starting to feed that leg cycle forward, right?
Ankle weights would resist on the way up.
So I saw a drill on Facebook. If anybody follows me on Facebook, I saw something on, sorry, CrossFit Endurance, but they were taking medicine balls. Where's that big, give me that big medicine ball, please, Bridge. They were taking these 16-pound medicine balls, or these bash balls, putting them in between their legs, and then passing them to one another by doing jumps and kicking back. Okay, that's a open chain concentric load on the posterior chain. Never happens in running. I don't know if it happens in any sport, unless that's in a sport, maybe in soccer. I don't know. But yeah, ankle weights, no, because then what you're doing is you're loading the concentric part. What I want to do, the hamstrings are the decelerator for both men and women. Women get a little bit into the quads. What we want to do is get this controlled and able to recoil as fast as possible. That's why we're kind of feeding that. So we don't want to feed weight on the up portion. Does that make sense? And then leg swings. Like I was talking about earlier, when you're doing leg swings, don't get really lazy and just get as much motion as you can. Lumbar extension, flexion, lumbar extension, flexion. Co-contract, keep this tight, even if it shuts down your range of motion. Start feeding to your body what you're going to do when you run or what you want it to do. Same thing goes for lateral. You're going to see I have it up there again on anti-rotation. A lot of people go through this, entire torso rotation. Shut this down short and give your body a feel of what control really feels like through here. Okay, so we did anti-extension. Other part of the core, anti-rotation. So this is a really fun test. I want everybody to go home or whenever you run next time, try this test. So just like we did right here. So we take this little drill, now we're going to turn it into a test. Next time you go run, maybe after you've warmed up, put hands right out in front of you, right out in front of your sternum. I want you to run at whatever a race pace would be, like a 10K pace, and see if you can keep your hands from not shifting side to side. You need to be able to keep your hands right down the midline, otherwise you have a midline stabilization problem. And that's going to be even more apparent when you get fatigued or you try to run faster in a race. So that's going to turn into more kind of arm rotation, torso rotation, transfer up and down the kinetic chain into an injury or economy deficit. So fun little test. If you're wavering, you got an issue. Hopefully I'm giving you some tools to fix it.
Do you want me to get a theraband for that complex?
Yeah. So polyp press is really, it's an old Russian exercise, but it's really kind of based on the dead bug position. You can do it in any position. A polyp press kind of, you can do it off a cable machine. You're going to see how we're going to do it.
Dead bug.
Yeah, with head down here. So what we're trying to do now is fight rotation. So she's going to go back into that dead bug position. And she's going to grab this straight out in front, double overhand grip. So again, we're mimicking that midline core stabilization test. And if I load this thing up, you're going to see her have to fight rotation. And people that don't have a lot of stabilization are going to kind of, hip hike or lumbar extend because that's their compensation. So it's a good test and a good exercise as well. Now we can make it harder. Keep that grip. And now we can have her chop. So we can add, okay, if I'm pulling this way, does it make sense she's fighting rotation that way? Now if I have her take her hands out in line with her knee and chop up and down, now she's fighting extension. So now it's a 2-for-1, right? This is a huge core exercise. You're like, well, it doesn't look like she's doing much. She's doing a ton. You're going to see the veins in her forehead pop out here in a second. Okay, so polyp press, again, tons of variations, a lot of videos on our website. You can do it supine, on your back, half kneeling, standing. Again, I would never progress anybody that couldn't do this with a decent kind of resistance for 30, 45 seconds. There's no reason to. Just keep working on this. You're getting something out of it. Okay, RT1 rolls. We'll have Sloan get down on the ground for this one, see if she can do it. I know she can. If you guys want to come up here and look at her roll around on the floor, you can. But
Your feet that way.
so you saw the woman in that picture with the ball, the physio ball in between her hands and legs here. So again, if my whole goal for building this kind of core canister is hips to ribs, when I go to run, I don't want to let my torso spin, right? It's economically dysfunctional. It's also probably going to cause some injuries, chewing on the low back. So what you do in this one, it's kind of fun. She's going to try to roll side to side without any kind of, dissociation between hips and shoulder and ribs. So she should be rolling just like kind of a log roll or rolling as a canister. You also don't want to see the low back buck into extension. You can see right there she's got a bit of a...
It's hard though.
And then she, over time, will try to go all the way down, and you're going to see if you fall and can't bring it back out, bit of deficit. But this is a really fun one, but things like this this is a high-level activity, believe it or not. I mean, that's pretty hard to do, especially if you're doing it right. Sometimes you need somebody to look at it because you think you're doing it right, and you're just, compensating and going through this rolling movement.
It's tremendously easier to do it with my back.
Yeah, just let your legs go, pin your shoulders to the ground. You don't want that in running. Some sports like golf, we do to a certain extent, but in running, we want this to maintain and move these puppies around it just like that cheetah. Rotational planks. You want to do this one?
Yeah, why don't you do it?
I'll do it. Okay. So very high level activity here, but this kind of starts working not just the typical core, but down into the glute complex. So everybody's probably seen your side bridge, right? This is kind of your gold standard for, I'm working my obliques. Well, if we're a runner, we need to rotate around this fixed structure. So what we have a lot of people go after is kind of this reach back position. I think we've had Sammy doing these at one point. Now what you're going to do is from here, you're going to rotate around your body without breaking into that hip flexion, right? Now we're back in that anterior tilt. So it's like I have a pillar from shoulder to hip to knee, and I'm going to spin around it, tap foot and hand to the ground, spin right back out of it, butt down. I'm telling you, this is high level stuff. Might seem easy when you're doing it, but if you're doing it right, you shouldn't be able to do more than 10, you're just going to be dog. Right back out of it. High level activity, but at least, again, we have a goal. We're trying to work on our core in a fashion that's actually beneficial for running instead of just doing sloppy planks or sit-ups or whatever it is. Leg swings, when you're doing lateral leg swings, you're fighting rotation, right? If I'm going cross-body leg swing, don't let your whole torso go for a ride. Shut this down, go shorter, teach your hip how it's supposed to move around the body. Okay, we're about out of time. Gluteal amnesia protocol. Probably everybody should do this in some fashion or another. So we call it the ripple system. We covered this in the first clinic, but it's your little reset, integrate, pattern, and then load that pattern. That's how you want to work on any issue, whether it's mobility, stability, neurologic control, an injury. So if you have gluteal amnesia, I have my really bad analogy of a bum on the street, but you got to kick the bum to wake him up. So we kick bum by working on him with a foam roller, a lacrosse ball, you know, ART, an adjustment, whatever it is. So you're going to work on that glute. Once you've worked on that glute for a little bit, you might stretch that glute. So there's a lot of different stretches. I'm sure you guys are familiar with some, but figure 4 stretch, whatever you're doing here, a pigeon stretch, triplanar hip extension, whatever you need to do to get into this complex and dynamically move it around. We're just trying to create change. That's the R part of the ripple system. It's a reset. So it doesn't matter what it is, foam roll, stretch, you know, I'd rather be dynamic than static stretch. But that's your R. The I is integration. So if we're going after the glute, we have to start way back, right? We have to start way back with glute activation. So if you can't do this little test, and yeah, it looks funny, but you got to start somewhere. Hands under your butt, and if you can't get right glute, left glute, both glutes together to go, you better start practicing. If you can't do it like this, it's never going to happen when you run. So where we go from here is, if I can do it like that, we keep the feet out, knees bent, and we go through that. We keep creeping the feet in until they're pretty close, and I can still go through. Now we move into a glute bridge. So I like a cook bridge because it takes a little back out. So we grab one leg, we come up, back down. Now if you're getting a hamstring cramp, we need to go back down to this, right? Because we're trading hamstring for glute right there. So we have to get the glute to activate properly. Once we've activated or muscle tuned that a little bit, we want to integrate it, and we always integrate glute stuff usually with a squat. So we kind of skip a step. We go right to the pattern, right? So a deep squat. Now when you're working on squats, you might have a lot of issues, you know, not in your favor. Ankle mobility, whatever it is that doesn't allow you to get in a squat. I'm okay with cheating deep squat for gluteal amnesia stuff. So if you have to put something under your heels just to simply be able to get into the bottom of a squat, that's all right with me for this, not training purposes. I would never load somebody in a heel lifted squat. Does that make sense? There's a lot of people that would have to do the squat heels up. If you're going to do that, just give yourself a little brace. Go down into this thing. My other big kind of coaching cue for a deep squat is it's not like you're sitting back in a chair. This was my coaching cue when I was in high school. You're trying to create room in between your hips and your legs for your body to go into. So you have to kind of spread the knees. Remember we talked in the last clinic, we're kind of spreading the floor with our feet. We're building that torque. So your knees out, dropping your body into this position. So I'm not keeping knees together. I'm definitely not letting knees crash. So I want to torque into the floor, create kind of that stable foot, and drop into there. If I go through that little ripple system, I'm getting the best bang for my buck to kind of wake my glutes up. So I like to do this stuff before and after I run. Right? We talked about that kind of positive performance adaptation window last clinic. This is before and after stuff right here. I think that pretty much wraps it up. I wanted to, we're 7:35, we're still a little late. I want to make sure if anybody had any questions, we had time for questions this time, because I definitely went too long last time. We covered a ton of stuff, I know, but you could talk for days on this. But again, everything that's listed in those protocols is a video on our website. You can always email or call with a question. Go back through the slides. If you need the slides, I actually put the other slides up front, and we're videoing this one. They'll all be online, but please go back over them. If you guys don't have any questions, though, we're done for tonight.
We're gonna draw two.
Oh yeah, we got another Track Shack $50 gift card. You can't win. We got a farm hat and a scratch water bottle as well too.
Does everyone know what Scratch is? Good. We sell it here, and I meant to give you some of that stuff last time. Don't let me forget this time. We sell it here. It's just a very good, all-natural, real sugar, real carbohydrate, electrolyte balance.
So this will be for the water bottle.
Chelsea Palmer.
Woohoo!
Gotta be able to catch.
And Chelsea, draw the next one.
Thank you.
Robert starts with a P, the last
Okay.
name. Just a guy.
Hat. Okay, Traction Hat gift card again. It's an Insta gift, so we have to email it to you.
Hey, Sadie.
Ooh.
Look at that. All about
Really
Track
lucky.
Shack.
All right. So no questions from anybody? Silent crowd.
Yeah, the core exercises, are those like a 3-day a week
So,
thing?
well, let's just talk about that in general. So core gets a lot of like, oh, you can do it every day. I would, again, if I can give you 1,000 different core exercises, you can do it every day. Don't do the same ones every day, right? You can tax that system because it's a very complex system. So the chances of, you know, going after like, I'm working quads, I need 2 days of rest or a day of rest, that kind of school of thought's out, but you're never probably going to do that to your core. Obviously, if you're sore, and again, I hate the word core, to be honest. If you saw it, it's always in quotations, because core is this misnomer. So just think about your goals. Maybe one day you're doing anti-rotation stuff. The next day it's anti-extension. Maybe one day it's just in your drills. You're doing a lot of leg swings and lateral A skips and things like that where you're making sure that your core's stable. So you're always thinking about it, but you might not be doing the same thing every day. Does that kind of answer your question? All right. Well, I'll let everybody get out of here. I'm kind of on time. So thanks again for
And eat some
everybody
food
for
if
coming.
you didn't already get
Yeah.
some.
All right.